Monique Ryan, welcome to the program.
Thanks, David. Nice to be with you.
There's a bit going on this morning. We'll get to some of the policy announcements, but just on Donald Trump, are you on the same page as the Greens when it comes to these concerns?
Well, I wouldn't be using the sort of language that Adam Bandt's using about Donald Trump. I don't think that's helpful. I think that sort of undergraduate populism doesn't really sit well with electorates like Kooyong. But I do have to say that I am hearing from on the streets of Kooyong every day about people's concerns, both about trade alliances with the US, but also the potential for issues with AUKUS and our defence alliances as well. And they are things which are very much front of mind in electorates like mine.
You did join calls this week for a parliamentary inquiry into AUKUS. Why?
Well, I think that what we've seen in the unpredictability and chaotic nature of global politics in the last few months is a call really for all of us to look at our positioning as a nation and to think about the fact that the US might not always be, it's obviously a defence partner of our most important defence partner since 1940, but it might not always be a country which works to act in our best interest both on trade and on defence. And I think it is time for us to think about diversifying our interests as a country to build our resilience. And that's something that the major parties have been loath to speak to in recent times. What we've seen is that you couldn't put an envelope between them in their rush to be non-partisan on AUKUS and the like. But many people in electorates like Kooyong are concerned that we will never see the Virginia submarines and that we are wasting potentially $400 billion or more on a partnership which won't pay off in the way that we need it to down the track. And so they're asking, well, reasonably, I think, what are the other options and what else should we be thinking about?
Do you also have similar concerns or even greater concerns about Xi Jinping, China's president? And do you think we need some way of maintaining our national security?
Well, I think we do. Of course, we need national security, and everyone's very concerned about that. And the questions they are asking us are we best positioned to defend ourselves against potential threats down the track? Are we best positioned in doing that by putting all of our $400 billion or more into the AUKUS partnership, or should we be looking at other options as well?
Are you worried about Xi Jinping too?
I think we're all worried about the potential geopolitical situation, both in terms of trade and defence. And that's why we need to diversify potentially, or just think about other options available to us as an island nation, which is a long way from the US and whose interests are not always 100% allied with those of the US.
Let's turn to some of the domestic matters. Starting on tax, Peter Dutton today at his campaign launch is going to promise a one-off tax break up to $1,200 for low and middle income earners. Do you support that?
Look, it's really frustrating to see that Peter Dutton 2 weeks ago said that he had no interest in further tax cuts, and our understanding is that the Shadow Expenditure Review Committee has pretty much put that off the table a couple of weeks ago. Australians are struggling with the cost of living crisis. They're doing it tough, and they could probably do with some short-term cash. But what we're talking about with Peter Dutton's plan is a one-off sugar hit, which, let's face it, is the desperate act of someone whose electoral campaign is tanking and who's looking for some cheap votes.
So would you vote against it?
I don't think it would be in the best interests of our country to give everyone a one-off sugar hit tax cut at this point in time. We know that that would be inflationary. He's talking about putting $10 billion into the economy over a 12-month period. Australians are telling me that they're struggling with cost of living pressures. People are telling me that they really would like some interest rate cuts. The 3 interest rate cuts that we're expecting over the rest of this 12-month period would be put in jeopardy as a result of Peter Dutton's tax cuts.
But this wouldn't apply until mid-2026.
Well, I think the RBA and other economic institutions would be looking at the potential impact of these tax cuts, where we would be looking to factor them into our economy.
When it comes to tax reform generally, is there one specific thing you'd like to see?
I hear every day in Kooyong from young people that they don't think they're ever going to be able to afford a home of their own unless they can benefit from intergenerational wealth transfer from their parents, from the bank of mum or dad. So I think that when we look at tax reform, what we need is mature, visionary, well thought out, pragmatic tax reform, which will look at home availability and affordability for all Australians over the next generation. We haven't seen that from either of the political parties in this electoral campaign to date.
So would you like to see those investor tax breaks, negative gearing, capital gains tax breaks wound back?
I think we need to look at every aspect of our tax system to improve housing affordability for Australians. And so, people like yourself, Dave, will always ask me, what about this, what about this, what about this? Every lever needs to be on the table to improve housing affordability in this country, because it's a crisis 3 decades in the making for which neither of the major parties has to this point offered us adequate plans.
No, I hear what you're saying, but equally, saying we support tax reform is a lot easier than saying, well, here's one thing I actually believe in that I'd like to see changed. Are you able to say whether you want to see the negative gearing rules changed?
I think that we need to look at all of the rules around tax, both at a federal and a state level, to see whether or not they're fit for purpose at this point in time. One of the things I've been hearing about every day for the last 4 weeks is Victorians' frustration with land tax, with the somewhat capricious land tax that the Victorian state government has levied in the last couple of years. And the problem is that the way that that feeds into the federal tax system has been unexpected and really unpleasant for many people. We need the federal and state governments to be working together on these issues, not at odds with each other.
What about the housing policies that we'll hear today from both sides, starting with Labor's idea, making the first home buyers guarantee more widely available, where you only need a 5% deposit, and then investing in 100,000 new homes for first home buyers. Do you like that idea?
Well, I'm hearing from first home buyers, or potential first home buyers, that they've been looking for help. We've been hearing that for 3 years, and so I think that policies that will advance that for young Australians in particular are welcome. I think actually the most important part of the policy platform that Labor's rolled out overnight is the 100,000 new homes, because it seems clear that supply is the major problem in the housing market, and it's been the sticking point for making houses more affordable in general. And
what about Peter Dutton's idea that he'll announce today of interest deductions against your income tax for new home buyers?
Yeah, so it's an interesting piece, but the problem is it does not address the issue of supply to any significant extent. And there's a lot of unknown detail about this. Changes to the way that mortgages are considered under our tax system will then would have to feed into questions about how capital gains tax will be applied to those homes. And we don't have any detail about that, nor do we have any detail from the opposition as yet about the cost of this policy.
When you mention supply, the need for more supply, you have expressed some concern about high-rise developments in parts of your electorate, like Toorak. Do you support more high-density living in your seat?
I think densification is one of the most important parts of the housing problem in Australia, and everyone in Kooyong understands that we need more housing. We've had quite a bit of densification by proxy in recent years, but what the Victorian state government has put up is 25 activity centre plans, which would allow things like 3 to 6 storey developments in suburbs like Toorak and Hawthorn, where I live, where there are heritage overlays. And the Victorian state government hasn't undertaken the consultation required to get the community to come along with these programs. There's a lot of uncertainty about the impact of the densification that the state government is planning on things like traffic, on roads, on sewerage, on aged care, on childcare, on primary and secondary schools, which the Victorian state government has not spoken to, and its consultation process has been very poor.
On energy policy, Peter Dutton is promising to get more Australian gas kept in Australia through this East Coast gas reservation. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think many people have felt in the past that the East Coast has missed out. We've seen that the West Australia's had a gas reservation policy since 2006, and their gas is a lot cheaper than ours. But we also have the situation where 82% of the gas that comes off the east coast of Australia is exported. We only use 4.2% of that in the eastern states. And so the problem is not that we have a gas shortage. We don't. The problem is that we have a gas export issue where markets like Korea, China and Japan are paying much less for our gas than those of us on the East Coast are. We're being ripped off. So really what we do need a policy by which those people in the East Coast can access gas at the very least at the same prices as international neighbours. But I'm not sure that the gas reservation policy that that Mr Dutton has proposed, we don't have a whole lot of detail about it. There are some constitutional concerns about how it might work, and the reality is that, what we really need to do to bring energy prices down is to get off gas and to get off polluting fossil fuels and move more effectively towards renewables.
I want to ask you about a couple of campaign issues. Your fellow independent MP, Allegra Spenders, admitted that she's been paying social media content creator to make videos talking about the great things that she's doing. Are you doing this as well?
I'm not, but having said that, I do have someone who works with me who is my media advisor, and she makes social media content. The reality is that young people these days, I hate to break this to you, don't watch Insiders and they don't read the papers. They get their news off social media, and I think it's really important, as I have the youngest electorate in Victoria, that I engage effectively and well with the young people in my electorate, and I do that through social media to a significant extent.
I guess the difference is politicians aren't paying us or the newspapers to write about them. Here you're talking about a politician.
Some of us would argue about that actually, David. But
what would you argue?
Well, I would argue that some of the right-wing press in this country should come with a verification from the Liberal Party, because I do think that much of what is put into the press, and the right-wing press in particular, has been fed to it by my political opponents.
Well, okay, but we're talking about actually paying for content. Do you have a problem with that?
Look, I think we pay to generate the content that we're putting in front of the voters. I'm not sure that there's a big issue there.
But should it be clear to voters, people who are looking at this content, that it's paid for by the politician?
Look, I don't really have an opinion on it.
Really?
I think, well...
You don't think voters deserve to know that if someone they're watching is saying great things about a politician, whether they're being paid by that politician?
I'll have to give it some thought. It's not something I've given great thought to myself. Obviously, I haven't engaged in anything like that myself.
You'd have to give that some thought.
Well, I would think that it would be clear. I don't know. I think I'd have to give it some thought, David.
So you might be all right with politicians paying for content that voters have no idea money's changing hands?
Well, I think that's potentially been happening for a long time. If you look at the cartoons that Pauline Hanson's been putting on the social media for years now, which are very clearly politically biased.
But they're One Nation cartoons, aren't they?
I'm not sure that is the case, actually. I think it's an interesting question. I think media diversity and the way that our media works in this country is something which would certainly merit greater examination, and something that we could talk about.
OK, I'll move on. Your husband, of course, famously apologised for being caught on camera removing signs from your Liberal opponent, Amelia Hamer. One sign. What was he thinking? Have you got to the bottom of it?
Oh, look, it was an unfortunate episode. It shouldn't have happened. We all make mistakes in the heat of the moment. It was a one-off. We've apologised.
OK. And finally, if we do get a hung parliament at this election, the inevitable question, what are you going to do? I'm interested in how you approach the decision on which side you might back.
Well, it's been a bit difficult to date, David, because as we're seeing even today, the major parties are bringing out policies on the fly. We're less than 3 weeks from the election, and the opposition has just launched its first ever significant housing policy. What I would do in the event of being re-elected and neither major party being able to form government would be and them asking me for their assistance in guaranteeing competence and supply, was that I would sit down with them and try and determine which of them were best placed to provide the sort of mature, well thought out policy area that the people of Kooyong have told me that they want. We haven't seen that to date, and it's been frustrating, I think, for communities like mine, where we don't know what the major parties are necessarily going to be offering to them, particularly the opposition. But I would meet with both the leaders of both parties, whoever that might be, and try to come to a position that would best reflect the values of the people of Kooyong.
I mean, Peter Dutton has a go at you quite regularly. He calls you a green. Would you really be willing to support him to be Prime Minister?
I would support whichever major leader was able to provide those policies which are best in keeping with the values and the desires of the people of Kooyong.
Monique Ryan, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.